It's been a while since we last worked on a banjo. Banjos tend to be an unpopular subject for YouTube videos. The viewing numbers fall dramatically. So if you made it past the video thumbnail and description, thank you. You're in an exclusive group, the Banjo Appreciator subset. Good people, all of you. This is a Vega, kind of. It has a Vega neck, which is likely post-war, but the pot seems to be earlier. So it's kind of a Franken banjo. The owner wants to fix it up so that it's reliable and playable for his particular claw hammer technique. To accomplish that, we're going to have to bring down the action a lot, because we're starting off with 11/64 on the bass side and around 10 on the treble. So we're also going to do a refret. We're going to get some different tuners on there, fix it up. Let's have a look at the relief in the neck. Got a capo on the first fret. If there's a bunch in there, this instrument does have a truss rod, so that could help us to a certain extent. Measure here around the 12th fret. And we got around 10 thousandths. So that's okay. I'm going to try and adjust a little bit of that out of there and see if we can straighten things up a bit. To be honest, my reasons for adjusting this at this point are more exploratory than anything, because we're going to do a refret. It's nice to see how much tension is on here, though. Feels a little loose. Let's see what that did. This banjo has been subject to a number of different personalizations over the years, I guess you could say. Mods, maybe. Including this, the 5th string bridge, or pip, that carries the string has been replaced with what seems to be a brass furniture finial, which is carrying the string about 1/8 of an inch over the top surface of the frets, including the fret it's supposed to be sitting on. What this has the effect of doing is changing the string length. So if I was to engage the railroad spike capo here, the difference in string length is about 1/4 of an inch. So this would be exceptionally out of tune, and you'd have to immediately tune it quite a ways to get it into playing shape. So we're going to want to replace that. I'm not sure if these are the original tuners on here. Something tells me not, based on some of the marks around them. These are planetary gear tuners. The ratio on these is usually like 4:1, as opposed to old style friction tuners, which are 1:1. The player doesn't find them very satisfactory, and he would like to change them over to guitar style tuners, mimicking an instrument played by an artist named Chris Cool, who's got a set of Grovers on his. And so we'll do that. And the frets are getting pretty worn. This is fun. Have a look at how far off center the Vega is on this headstock towards the bass side. What are the chances this pip was put in with glue? Very likely. These original frets are about 70 thousandths wide by currently 27 thousandths tall. Let's get a little heat on the subject. How much heat? Enough to loosen whatever's in there. Things are getting juicy already. That's interesting. Grab the old soft jaw. That came right out. Neato. Also remove the railroad spike capo, because I don't want to have to try and level through that. There's your spike. Vega, as a company, was started in Boston, Massachusetts in 1881 by a bunch of Swedish fellows. Boston at that point was a real epicenter for music instrument making in the US. I think they were primarily building brass band instruments, but in 1904 they purchased the banjo works of the A.C. Fairbanks Company, and also the plucked instrument division of a company called Thompson & Odell that made mandolins and guitars, as well as banjos. And in the following years, they came up with a bunch of pretty interesting ideas, including the tubaphone tone ring, which is a metal ring that sits between the head and the wooden rim of the body. Sort of a prefiguration of what would become the resonator style banjo that we associate with bluegrass. Lots of volume and a certain metallic component to the tone. Vega kept going into the 60s. It was associated with the folk movement. Pete Seeger and a bunch of other guys played one. Pete's had the extra long extended neck that he was known for. And eventually Martin Guitars picked up the company during its buying spree in the 70s. I don't think they did very much with it. The name was, it was on some strings and stuff, but eventually they sold the name to the Deering Banjo Company, who still use it. They make a line of old-timey folk banjos. I'll take this thing apart. The little bracket here that holds the tailpiece for the strings also constrains the end of the dowel stick. The neck is held on the other end with a lever thingy that's got a pin running through the dowel stick that acts as a pivot point. There's a little horseshoe-shaped pressure plate. There were a number of different systems in use back then. Take a little bit of wiggling, and out it comes. I'll pop the nut loose. I'll level the fretboard. This has seen substantial play over the years. The player would like what is known as a strum hollow, which gives some room for the fingers, which are used in the claw hammer technique, and the thumb. And so we're going to do that in the frets. Don't actually have to excavate the board at this point, we don't think. So I'm going to mark out a spot here. I have to make myself some ebony dust as part of the filling procedure. I'll fill the slots with some veneer. Then I'll come back and fill the divots formed by the fret barbs with the mixture of glue and ebony dust. After everything's been scraped and sanded level, I'll cut some fret wire. This is just a basic bound fret job. So the tangs are cut back so that the ends of the frets will overlap the binding. Toward the end of the board where we've got partial frets, I have to finish the ends before they get installed. Snippety snip. Scrubbity scrub. Leveledy lev. Crownity crown. Okay, you got some tuners here. These are Wilkinsons that are essentially a clone of a Grover Rotomatic. About half the price and quite reasonable in quality. The holes require just a touch of reaming to fit. Of course, the new taller frets require a new taller nut. I'm thinking about how to change the angle on this neck. It's quite a move, actually. You know, I want to lower the action by about 4/64ths. It's like 1.5 millimeters, which means the projection at the bridge has to come up double that amount. 1/8 of an inch, 3.1 millimeters, in that ballpark. That's a significant shift. And because this is a simple old-timey neck-through attachment, it doesn't have coordinator rods or a turnbuckle like many bluegrass banjos do, which physically deform the pot slightly to pull the neck back. I'm stuck having to remove material somewhere and physically change the neck position. Now there are two ways to do that. I can either remove material from the back of the heel, like we do in a guitar neck. The issue is these only contact the pot for about 1.25 inches or so. So to move that much, I'm removing an awful lot of material. And the issue is with that much movement as well, you have to remember there's a pivot point here, the other end of the stick is going to have to shift forward towards the front of the pot a very long way. Looking at the exterior of the pot, this little guy here that holds the tailpiece in position, that mounts onto a threaded rod which comes off that stick. And you can see that, you know, if we have to move this very much forward, we're going to run out of this metal hoop and be into the wood. Don't really want to do that. The other thing is the mortises would have to be cut through at an angle too to accommodate. With the accompanying change in heel angle, this gets to be trigonometrically pretty complex. So I'm thinking the safest, easiest, and most reliable method will be to shift those mortises up the same amount on both sides and keep the fretboard basically coplanar with the top of the pot. Now that will raise the end of the fretboard slightly above the edge of the ring, which in a case like this where someone's frailing or clawhammer picking in this region, that might actually be advantageous because it'll keep your hand slightly above the hardware, less interference. So I'm thinking that's the best plan. The procedure involves removing a small amount of material from both the stick and the pot mortise. The parts interlock with each other, and I want to preserve as much strength as possible in the stick, so I'm taking half the required dimension from each side, which is about 1/16 of an inch. On the next side of the mortise, I have to file away some material in the metal ring. On the tail side, I'm doing something similar, but I'm lengthening the hole. And I have to make some filler blocks to close up the gaps. The one for the neck side, I'll make a press fit so they can be removed and the neck comes free easily. The one on the tail side, I'll glue in place so the end of the stick has a nice firm square mortise to lock into. Here's a basic diagram showing the interlocking nature of things. The brown part is the neck assembly, the blue is the pot, and the red is shim material. You can see that I've moved things vertically. There's also a shim against the front surface of the neck, and this actually tips the neck back a degree or so when the stick is tightened. The 5th string peg, which is a friction peg, is both loose and not great. So I'm going to be replacing it with this geared peg from Godot. Now there's a universal axiom that no two 5-string pegs are ever the same size and taper. Frank Ford said buy an $8 hardware store reamer and chop it off into something close and use that. So that's what I'm doing. Frank used to physically hammer them home into place with a hammer. I feel more comfortable using a quick grip clamp to squeeze them in. I'll cut off a short length of 3mm brass rod to make a new 5th string pip. I'll press that into place. And I'll rough cut it to height. And dial it in with a file. This has to be tall enough that it's going to hold the string in position, but it's more of a spacer than a nut. I'll use a nut file to make the groove, which has to be lower than the accompanying fret. It looks something like that. Now I can go back and, with strings on, dial in the correct height for the nut slots. Brand new bridge, and the 5th string is cut deeper than the others, which is kind of annoying. Here we are. Previously, the bridge on this had been cut down to about 1/2 inch height, and the new one is the full 5/8, which is pretty much standard, and it's what you want. Like, if you start getting lower than that, you end up with some serious compromises in terms of volume and tonal response. So that's why we don't tend to cut down banjo bridges very far, unless, you know, it's a serious budgetary issue. That was an extraordinary amount of fussing and fighting to get things dialed in, and I didn't show the 5 or 6 times I had to take it all apart and change the shim thicknesses to make things line up. The idea that you can put one banjo's neck on another instrument is not usually an easy thing to accomplish. They generally aren't interchangeable, but this one is together now. The action is way down. Usually banjo action is measured at the body, here, and the standard measurement is about 1/8 of an inch, just over 3mm. And that usually correlates with about a 6/64 action at the 12th fret, where I usually measure everything, and that's what we've got. So, happy days.